All right, let's get to this next one. This one is for my friend Marshall, who's very interested in all these types of things. And it's an interesting news story with Donald Trump and the new social media app, Gettr. Now, you guys might have heard of Gettr. It is a social media app. It's essentially a Twitter copy, which is owned by Jason Miller. Now, Jason Miller was a senior advisor to the Trump campaign in 2016, was a big Trump surrogate here in DC. Then after Trump got banned from Facebook and Twitter, went and launched this new platform. There were a lot of discussions, like Parler obviously went down, Amazon Web Services and all of that. Gab is basically untouchable, and so Trump's not going to go on Gab. Nobody really knew where Trump fell on all of this, because he also had his ill-fated blog for a time, which wasn't doing that well. But this actually could be his real return, and to try and get his return to social media ahead of a possible 2024 run. So all that exposition kind of out of the way, let's put this up there on the screen from Axios. Basically, it's a scoop from Sarah Fisher, great reporter, by the way. She says, Trump wants equity in Jason Miller's social media app. So here's what she writes, quote, the former president has yet to join the app, although sources say conversations about his participation are ongoing. Discussions about equity are likely part of those conversations. So basically what Trump is saying is, I'm not lending you my brand and all of my people, Jason, unless you give me some ownership of this. Parler actually offered him equity, as far as I know, back in the day, and they decided not to do it. But what do you make of this whole thing, Marshall?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with this story because it's the perfect intersection of politics, technology, and media. There's this idea and this concept of the creator economy, which is basically that because of the internet, because of the way things work right now in business, you as a media person, me as a media person, we no longer need to go to big institutions, and we actually have a bunch of tools, whether it's Supercast, which is how this show is done, whether it's Patreon, we can actually do things that way. And the implication of this idea is that the central value on any platform is actually you. I would actually say with Supercast, you and Crystal's success is huge. So if people look at Donald Trump and say, wow, Donald Trump is just trying to get equity? That seems kind of weird. My point is, if I could play Donald Trump's agent for a second, hell yes, he's getting equity, because Donald Trump is the central value in all these platforms. I was trying to think, and I was prepping for the show, there's like 15 to 20 different free speech, conservative.
Mike Lindell has one, right?
See, there's always different apps, right? And the app which is going to dominate, because once again, most of these things we always talk about are probably winner-take-all markets. No one's looking to have 5 different conservative to IDW apps. Is going to be the one that brings Donald Trump and his actual audience there. So the key thing there is that Trump should be demanding it, because let's say Jason Miller's Gettr really works out, and let's say it becomes a unicorn, it's valued more than $1 billion. If I'm Donald Trump, I'm thinking, wait a second, why am I just getting tips? Because the way it's going to monetize itself right now is advertising and tips. If you're Donald Trump, you're like, wait, why am I not getting a huge cut of money whenever this thing IPOs or sells to someone? So this is an entirely reasonable demand. It should be done. This is the way the world works from now. And just like the last thing, because I really want to make this clear, because it's a really important idea. The Hill just sold for a decent amount of money. You and Crystal built this huge platform, and under traditional media, the two of you would not have gotten any traditional upside from that.
Right.
I think that's BS. I don't think that's how these things are moving forward. And I think it's important that people take that as the takeaway. If there are any people who are creators who are watching this segment right now, if you're spending time on an app because there's so many different ones, you should really be asking yourself, am I the primary generator of value here? And if so, I should be asking for a cut.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. The funny thing is, though, they're going to run into some problems. So people are already pointing towards this. Didn't have an element made for this, unfortunately, but it's about how just a couple of days, about a month ago, August 2nd, jihadists flood pro-Trump social network with propaganda. Gettr. So they are now awash with beheading videos and extremist content. So that means they are going to have to start taking some of this down, sometimes sometimes at the behest of federal law, sometimes, just because that's not what you want on your platform. So I wonder, are they just going to wander into the same minefield that Twitter is? Everybody's already pissed off about Twitter. Everybody's pissed off about Facebook. Liberals are mostly pissed they don't censor enough. Republicans are pissed that they censor too much. But kind of what this illustrates to me is you do have to have, and I've said this so many times here, and I know people don't like to hear it, you have to have some type of moderation. I'm not saying I'm cool with the current moderation regime, but Do you really want beheading videos to proliferate on Twitter? Like, no, I don't want that. It was actually a really bad thing. I remember covering it at the time, 2013, 2014. ISIS was getting away scot-free on Twitter, and they were doing a lot of recruiting and propaganda kind of on the platform. And Twitter was like, I mean, they were very slow, frankly, to take a lot of it down. And I think that this is a good example of some of the problems that when they start to get into this business for themselves, you can say free speech all you want, but you are going to have to take some stuff down. Like, nobody does want to live in a zero moderation world. How do you think they're going to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just funny to bring it back to Mike Lindell for a second. Remember when he announced his app was actually crazy moderated.
He's like, I'm Christian. Yeah, he's like, this is a Christian platform. You're getting censored if you're not. Right.
And the key lesson there is that a lot of times, and this is why it's important for you to make the point you're making about moderation. Because I think when people use the word censorship, it obscures people's ability to think, which is, Mike Lindell, your problem with Twitter isn't that there are literally some type of rules. Your beef is just that they aren't Trumpy right-wing Christian rules.
Correct.
So in this case, I'm really interested in how this could possibly relate to what happened with OnlyFans. Think about this. OnlyFans walked back their live sex policy, so that's not going to happen anymore. But the initial thing that drove that decision and literally changing the nature of their app was bank and capital raising. Regulation and whether they can actually get funding. If you're Getter, I really wonder, because let's get real for a second, this thing is not going to be profitable. It's going to require a lot of money. It's going to require the usage of banks.
Yeah.
I really wonder, in a post-OnlyFans debacle world, is it possible for a platform to take that aggressive of a stand if they're actually going to treat themselves as a real business? If this thing is going to basically say, look, we're doing this for funsies, it's like many things in the political world, and it's really just about like vibes and things like that, that's one thing. But if this is an actual business, then that actually suggests that there's gonna be a major issue coming down the line. And I would really suggest that Jason Mill and anyone at that platform do is actually think to yourself, okay, but seriously, what do we do when January 6th 2.0 happen and not just make these decisions on the spot? Because when we see all these really, everyone now agrees these are bad decisions for basically, like, for example, the New York Post, Hunter Biden story, which everyone now agrees was a bad decision.
But not at the time.
It happened because these platforms did not say to themselves, hey, we're super afraid of getting criticized by the New York Times for different things. What do we do when there's an emergency? Probably call Jack, because instead they're just like, oh, take it down.
Yeah, ban it. All right.
That was the wrong approach, and I doubt, let's be real, Jason Miller is doing this level of thinking.
Well, what's funny is that here's the quote from their actual website. Getter is a not biased social media network for people all over the world. Getter tried the best to provide best software quality to users, allow anyone to express their opinion freely. So the terrible grammar and all of that aside there, what are they trying to get at? I mean, I do think they're kind of walking themselves into a problem, and you're going to see that, like the jihadist thing, that's how it always starts. It always starts with the jihadists and the white nationalists, right? Because they always flood this type of sites like Gab. I think the same thing happened over there. And I think Gab also, what was a synagogue shooting or whatever that was transported there, and they had to go and take a bunch of stuff down. And I always see this kind of with these like very, very pro. That's like, look, eventually one of these things is going to happen on your platform. Now, the real question is, what do you do about it? Because especially whenever it's in violation of federal law, like that is where you especially have to say, okay, like this is going to be a real problem for us. And I don't think they have any problems necessarily taking that down, but you know, there's a reason that most people say you shouldn't advocate for violence, right, on a platform. And actually, I mean, that is technically, it's dubious as I understand it, but it could be legal. Or you could, you know, if you're insinuating it or like you post somebody's, there's nothing illegal, I think, about posting somebody's address. And just be like, just so you know, like that's happening. But we all know exactly what's going on there, right? So that's the problem they're going to run into, especially if they start to scale. Like if Trump does get on here, I mean, that's millions of people, millions and millions, right, which they're going to have. And then something, Ben Thompson, I've talked about him before, tech, is he a blogger? I don't know. Analyst, let's call him that.
These terms all merge.
Yeah, Tech Stratechery is his newsletter that I subscribe to. And he wrote about this once. He's like, part of the problem whenever you're running social media companies, and again, I'm not defending YouTube's regime, Twitter's regime, Facebook. We have plenty of criticism for that here. But he goes, if you think about the scale of the problem is when you onboard all of humanity, you are onboarding also the worst of humanity, which is that, look, most people are good people, but there are rapists, murderers, pedophiles, jihadists, etc. amongst us. So we have to decide how the hell we're going to deal with that. Kind of the same principle applies online, which is that, look, it's a use case of 1 in 100,000, but multiply that by millions, you've actually got a lot of cases that you kind of have to figure out what the hell you're going to do here.
Well, and look, the answer is that you should be honest. Aside from the terrible grammar, as you pointed out, it was a mistake from them to say they're not biased, because that's just BS.
Right.
Everyone has a bias. I thought we'd move past this idea that I'm the totally neutral. We're totally neutral, Saagar. We have that's BS, and that's not true. Jack Dorsey definitely regrets saying back in the early 2010s that Twitter is the free speech wing of the free speech party. That was not actually true. He didn't actually believe that. That's not me trying to dunk on Jack. It's just that he had a faulty conception of what that meant. Jason Miller has a really faulty conception of what bias is. So what you actually have to do here, this is a skill for politicians, this is a skill for tech founders, think of what people are actually asking for. No one is asking people to not have a perspective, but they're saying, hey, can you be fair? What pisses conservatives off about YouTube, Twitter, all these platforms, because let's get real for a second, most people actually have a pretty decent time on these platforms. If you're a normal conservative with sub 300 followers, you're having a pretty okay time.
You're having a great time.
I'm sorry, it's true, I said it. But here's what's legitimate about your gripe. You do not trust the moderators. You see the fact that 9 out of 10 times, I'm making that statistic up, but it's directionally true, the moderation mistakes seem to trend to one specific end of the angle. So what Jason Miller should say is, look, I have a perspective. Saying I want this to be totally free and open, that's a perspective. Like, that is actually a bias, and he shouldn't pretend otherwise. But he should instead say, look, we're going to be a platform that you can trust. We're going to be a platform that our number one job is going to be making sure that anyone who's taking down a jihadi video, anyone who's taking down a mosque shooting, that they are trained and they are not biased and they understand what they are doing. We frankly are only going to hire people who understand that. That is what his job is to convey as a CEO.
Yeah, and part of the problem that they're already beginning to have, and this popped up on Business Insider just a couple of days ago, is that the problem that because it's built on free speech, like I said, what starts to happen? Now they have problems in terms of moderation on child pornography. And it's like, the more you dig into these things, this almost always seems to happen. I watched this QAnon documentary on HBO, which I actually highly recommend. And it was funny because 8chan, which is as wild of the West as it possibly gets, they have to do the same problem, right? They actually have an immense team of moderators in order to remain in legal compliance, because they have the same issue. They're going to get flooded with like the absolute dregs of society, and it's just interesting to me about how Trump and all of them are going to have to navigate this, because they have to, right? And especially not just Jason Miller, and right now, I think there's only a couple million people on the platform, which is, actually not bad. But let's say Trump gets on there, we're talking about tens of millions of people who might follow him. They're gonna have to run into these same things like every time. And the way they navigate it, you've got to think very clearly kind of up at the top. And that is why I just wish that people would do.
Well, and just one quick thing, Mr. Social Media growing audience king over here.
Yeah.
Are we actually sure that Trump is going to bring millions of people?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm asking you this, right? Like, let me take over the interview slot for a second. Is it possible that Trump isn't actually worth taking 20% equity? Because I actually could totally see a bear case for actually Trump will like throw up some half-assed content, but it's actually not going to drive millions of people there. And actually the truth is that, Twitter is actually fine for most people, and that's that. What do you think?
Maybe, I don't know. It also depends on the monetization, right? So like, look, maybe not tens of millions is the right word, but like 10 million is probably correct. I think 10 million, that's a lot of people, okay? And like, that's enough people where, if you're advertising for like some sort of like MAGA adjacent brand, like I could definitely see how they could make that work. I'm not saying it's gonna be $1 billion company, but like, could it be $100 million company? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And so like, that's kind of what, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, and Crystal and I have talked about this. Let me see if I can find it, which is that Trump's social media, in terms of his disappearing names, this was an interesting kind of analysis, which is that this was recently, I'm reading from a Newsweek piece. I'll put the link down there in the description just because we don't have a tear sheet made. Data supplied by Brandwatch showed more than 355 million mentions of Donald Trump on the social web from the start of June to the end of July 2021. Now, this is important because June 2020 is where you start to see the most. Same thing in October and November. But listen to this. The low point is April of 2021 with 2.4 million. That is a 95% drop from its peak. So in July, the current figure is at 3.5 million. So the all-time low obviously happens in April. Not really sure what was going on in April, but anyway, that's what happens. So the figure is interesting because if you consider it, it's like this huge spike. I mean, like I just said, 50-something million, and then it drops to 2 million. And Crystal is always pointing to this, as there was a Google Trends piece back, I think, in March, which said that Trump's search regime, sorry, I keep saying regime. I'm not sure why that's in my head. And so Trump's search results, as in the number of Google searches for him, had actually returned to pre-2015 levels. That's actually really bad because, you know, I think I've told this story before publicly, but I believe the most revealing episode that I ever saw of Trump whenever I was a White House correspondent is whenever it was right after the midterm elections, and one of the reporters came to thank him and was like, "Thank you so much for doing this press conference." And he looked at him with so much contempt, and he's like, "It's called earned media. It's worth billions." As in, it's very much just like, none of this is about you. It's about me. I'm using your platform to get attention, which is the number one commodity that I have in this world. So yeah, I don't know if he does. And actually, this is kind of an interesting point. You know, if he does actually want to run again, he does kind of need Twitter and Facebook. And this is a very uncomfortable conversation that both sides have to have, which is that Trump is actually not bigger than Twitter or Facebook, but also it recognizes the fact that, well, if that's true, then Twitter and Facebook definitely do play an extremely vital resource in our discourse, which means that they are varying very much on the utility status, whatever. You decide whatever commiserate policy options that you want there. But I do think that is true. I've seen actually some public reporting that, I think it was from Axios, it was a couple of months ago, that the Trump team saw a Trump return to Facebook as vital, quote, vital to his ability to run in 2024. And that just tells you a lot about what that actually means if you do need to run again for when you run a campaign.
Yeah, and look, like, to sum it up, the part that I'm utterly convinced of is, A, if Trump wants to run for president again, like you just said, it is a total mistake for him in exchange for fake equity to go onto this platform, because Trump in a vacuum is just boring.
Yeah,
Trump, like, without a Jake Tapper tweet or some other thing, what's the point of this spectacle? Mm-hmm. There's no point. It's not entertaining. It's not helpful. So he's really. I guess what's difficult is they're not going to let him back on Twitter. So he's in this weird, Trump genuinely is in this really tough position where there's these two, it's not even clear there's two paths here.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know how it all works out for him.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.